Okay, Juror 117. Good morning. A couple things before I turn you over to the attorneys for questioning. If you could raise your right hand so that all your answers are under oath, and we'll swear you in. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
Okay. A couple things is we have plexiglass between us and plexiglass in front of you and plexiglass in front of the lawyers where they are questioning you from, which is a bit of a distance away. So if you would be more comfortable or to be able to speak more clearly, feel free to remove your mask at any time. And if you want to put it back on at any time, also just fine.
Okay.
I kind of leave that to you.
Okay, thank you.
In either case, I would ask that you move close to the microphone so that we can pick up your voice nice and loud. All right. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire. Thank you for doing that. Was everything on that questionnaire true?
Yes.
Okay. Anything that you needed to change or add to from that questionnaire?
I don't think so. Only it's like I mentioned that my English is not perfect.
Okay. We don't need that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit.
No, I'm just saying like that I might not understand all the words.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that then. I gave you some instructions on the law. Did you pretty much understand all of that?
So.
Okay. Anything in particular that didn't make sense to you, or? And
I'm just so nervous. I can't remember.
yeah.
Yeah.
For those, we understand when jurors come here, all jurors are nervous when they come here because it's totally a strange situation. It's only those of us who kind of live in the courtroom, like judges and lawyers, who are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So don't worry about that. But obviously, if you feel that your ability to understand everything might be impaired, how much of the concepts of law that I told you about were you able to kind of understand?
I don't know.
Half, do you think?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. This case might also involve some fairly technical language from expert witnesses, medical testimony, things like that. Do you think that would be a problem for you to understand all that?
It will be a problem, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think then maybe, given the fact we're going to have some fairly technical language regarding from witnesses and that, and your concern, I don't want you worrying about it, certainly during a trial. So, given the length and nature of this trial, I'm going to excuse you from this jury panel, and you'll be excused from all other cases, so you won't be called up for another case.
Okay.
Unless
Awesome.
years from now we send you a summons.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. That was your 117 for cause. All right, come on up here. Morning. You are juror number 118, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Before we do anything else, I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. You can raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right. First of all, since there's plexiglass in front of you, plexiglass between us, the lawyers have plexiglass where they're going to be examining you from, and it's quite a distance on top of that. And so the question for you is whether or not you want to remove your mask. It's totally up to you.
Okay.
If it's more comfortable, or that'd be great.
Sure.
And if you feel like you have to put it back on, I'm going to keep mine on.
Okay.
So if that works, also mask or no mask, if you could keep, that's actually probably perfect as far as distance to the microphone.
Okay.
Okay. A couple questions from me first. First of all, you filled out the questionnaire, which gave us a lot of good information, so thank you for doing that. Was everything true on the questionnaire?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And you've already got the one thing you knew to follow up with yes after the mm-hmm. The court reporter is taking everything down, so if we can stick to kind of yes and no.
Okay. Yeah.
That'd be great. And don't worry about interrupting with affirmations as someone's asking you a question. Just wait for it to come, answer the question. It's a little more formalized than a normal conversation, and I apologize for that, but we got to make sure that everybody doesn't talk on top of each other so the court reporter can take everything down.
Perfect.
Okay?
Okay.
Excellent. And you see, I'm the worst at interrupting anyway, so don't worry about it. Just give it your best shot. Are there any changes or additions to the questionnaire?
Not that I know of right now.
All right, and that's a very broad question, but we do recognize that in the last couple months since you filled this out, in reflection, you may have thought, well, I should have added this, or I forgot about this, or something you wrote was inaccurate, or maybe even an opinion has evolved. The bottom line being, I want you to feel comfortable giving answers that are different from the questionnaire. As long as they're honest, that's what we want, okay? Also, it's been about a couple months. We told you not to read any newspaper articles, stay away from the media about this case. But given the saturation of the news media with this case, were you inadvertently exposed to any information about this case or related cases, anything like that?
Nothing new that I haven't already known.
Okay.
Yeah.
And anything about related cases, like civil cases, anything like that?
No, just most recently the settlement, but that was the only thing that I've actually heard.
And what do you recall about the settlement?
The only thing that I know about it is that it was $27 million.
Okay.
But that's all. I didn't read up on it or have any other information on it.
Just saw the passing headline or news? Yeah.
Yep.
How do you think that's going to affect you as a juror in this case?
I don't necessarily think it would because I don't know anything about it. I just saw the number and that was it.
Like, for example, in answer to whether you can be fair and impartial, it's a little more wordy than that, but whether you can be fair and impartial, you said, I believe I could.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the lawyers are going to press you a little bit about yes or no, can you be? But I'll leave that to them. My question is, has hearing about that settlement moved you one way or the other?
No.
Okay.
No.
You understand that's a different case, different laws, civil case, not a criminal case, different parties, and it won't be in evidence in this case.
Correct.
Can you accept that?
Yes.
And that brings up the most important point, which is no matter what you've heard, and you've heard quite a bit, I mean, you've got a lot in there, that's okay. And you may have formed certain opinions based on what you've heard and read. But you have to put everything aside, what you've heard and read and seen, and also any opinions you might hold based on that. And just decide this case on the facts and the laws we give it to you.
Correct, yes.
Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
Okay. A little easier question. Do you recognize any witnesses on the witness list?
I did not.
Okay. And the trial length is going to be 4 weeks long, starting Monday. Could you make that work?
Yes.
All right. All right. With that, then, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson with regard to Juror 118. You may inquire.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the time you took to fill out your questionnaire. I'd like to ask you just sort of a series of general questions first, get to know you a little better, and I'll follow up with some of your responses, okay?
Okay.
I'm not going to try to trick you. I'll read you what the question was, what you wrote, and just to refresh your recollection, okay?
Okay.
All right. So if you and I were to meet under different circumstances at a party or social event, What are a couple of things I would learn about you during our first conversation?
I was recently married in October of last year. I am a social worker. I'm contracted with Wright County. And I just recently got a dog.
A dog?
A dog, yep.
Okay. A puppy or rescue?
Puppy, yep.
Rescue puppy?
No, golden doodle puppy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You obviously had heard quite a bit about this case before you learned that you were a potential juror on this case. How did it make you feel when you learned that you were a potential juror on this case?
I guess indifferent. I wasn't excited. I wasn't sad at all. I just was. I understand it's my duty to do it. I've been a registered voter, so I knew it was coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have concerns about your personal safety, your family's safety, your COVID-19 exposure, anything of that nature?
I guess a little bit of my own safety, but at the same time, being a social worker, I've kind of always had that in the back of my mind. I've had a lot of training for that kind of thing, so it's always in the back of my mind, but nothing more intense or different than any other time.
Okay. When you came downtown and saw the current state of the government center, what was your reaction to that?
I felt very safe. No concerns, really.
Okay. When you heard the judge this morning say that we're doing what we can to protect your anonymity, how did that make you feel?
Oh, really good.
Okay.
Felt pretty good about that.
Okay. Now, at some point, when the court determines it to be safe to do so, your name will be released publicly. Mm-hmm. We have no idea when that will be. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
I have come to accept that in the same sense of my safety for the last 5 years of being a social worker. Just it's always in the back of my head. So okay. I have training and know what to look out for and things like that too. So
okay, fair enough. So obviously, in your professional life, you deal with conflict in many forms. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes.
How do you approach just the notion of resolving a conflict between two people?
Mostly figuring out communication that works for them. I really have to be flexible and understanding of where they're coming from and really try and resolve conflict with them instead of trying to make things worse in lack of a better way of saying that. But really just working with the person and coming to their level and understanding.
Do you think your approach to conflict resolution changes if you're personally involved in the conflict?
Can you clarify a little bit?
Sure. Well, let's put it this way. You understand that your job as a juror is to ultimately resolve conflict. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is there's the obvious conflict between the state of Minnesota and Derek Chauvin.
Yes. And
that's your kind of the ultimate job, right?
Yes.
But in the jury deliberation room, sides may emerge. Right?
Yes.
One person or group of people may look at something much differently than another group.
Yes.
Right? So I guess the question is, when you talk about approaching conflict between two people or two groups of people, you have one approach. But what if you're personally invested in one of the sides of the conflict? Does that make sense?
Yes. I treat it the same way. I think I still have to come up with, I would hope that other people would listen to where I'm coming from and how I'm understanding things and talking through it with me, so that we can all be on the same page to figure out like a solution or just an answer to whatever the question may be. Hearing all sides is the most important thing in all of what I've been trained to do and everything too. Just my side too is always important.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you took a particular position on some piece of evidence or group of evidence, whatever it may be, are you the type of person who would agree just for the sake of agreement, or would you stand your ground and say, no, this is the way I see it?
No, I do stand my ground. You do have to have a strong sense of that, especially just with other people I've worked with too. There is certain conflicts that you do have to stand your ground in, but also making sure it makes sense to both parties as well, for everyone's sake. But I think it depends on what is being talked about as well. If
Right. It's hard to put it in the abstract.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Until
broad.
Yeah. Until you're in the situation, it's very difficult to kind of know. But-
Correct.
And that's just kind of what I'm wondering is that, you've lived your own life, you've had your own experiences, you have your own career. So in that context, can you simultaneously stand your ground and re-examine your point of view?
I believe I could, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, I'm assuming in your professional context as a social worker, you have encountered people you believed to be lying to you.
Correct.
How do you ascertain if someone is telling you the truth?
Asking questions, figuring out where they're coming from, why they believe that, or why they're thinking that way, evidence as to what that idea or thought is, and then kind of piecing it all together to see if it makes sense. And
Do you think that two people could literally be standing next to each other, observe the same event, and perceive that event differently?
Absolutely.
And what factors play into that difference in perception?
The person, where they've come from, their own experiences that they've had, their own biases that they've had. Lots of things could come through with their point of view on that.
Okay. Maybe their education or professional experience.
Correct. Yeah.
Can you think of a situation in your life where you felt you were 100% correct and only to later learn you were wrong?
Absolutely.
Okay. How do you deal with that when that happens?
I would just, I really try and understand. I try and process that information. I am perfectly able to admit when I am wrong. I really enjoy actually hearing other people's sides and hearing other people's opinions on things. I think I really like learning about other people's experiences and their point of views on things, because it opens my own eyes as well.
Okay. So, you were asked a series of questions on the questionnaire, and the judge just this morning recited some basic principles of law. So, for example, the presumption of innocence. Would you have any problem applying the presumption of innocence in this case?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure. Will you apply the presumption of innocence in this case?
Yes.
You understand that Mr. Chauvin has no obligation to prove anything. Do you understand that?
Correct.
We don't have to ask a single question, call a single witness, introduce a single piece of evidence. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
And so can you ultimately, in your opinion, hold the state to its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
Yes.
Now, at the end of the case, you may, you'll see all the evidence, anything that comes in, all the questioning of witnesses, etc. And you understand you have to judge the case based on the evidence that's presented exclusively in this case. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And can you do that?
Yes.
All right. And will you do that?
Yes.
All right. The judge will give you instructions of law, and you may read the law. I'm assuming, again, in your work, you've confronted statutes or laws and rules, right?
Correct.
And you may read the law, and as the judge gives it to you, and you may disagree with the judge, or you may think we really need to change this law because this makes no sense, right? Mm-hmm. Can you apply the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you think it's wrong or you think it should be changed?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'd like to follow up on some of your answers to your questions, or to the questions on the questionnaire, and want to ask you, again, or remind you I'm not trying to trick you. I'll read you exactly what you wrote and what the question was. Okay? There were several references to some videos that were publicly released. There was a bystander video, there were some body camera videos, and then there were some surveillance videos from local stores. Which of those videos do you think you've seen?
I believe I've only seen the bystander
Okay.
video. I don't remember seeing any body cam or any store videos at all.
Okay. And I think you said you have seen that video 4 to 5 times.
Correct.
When you say you saw it 4 to 5 times, did you come across it in the news? Did you come across it in social media? How did you first come across that video?
I have only seen it through the news.
All right.
So, yeah.
So you never went on the internet, tried to find a longer version of the video?
Correct.
And so is it fair to say that what you've seen are clips of that video? Shorter clips?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you were asked to kind of recite what you had remembered about what you had seen in the news or what you had heard about the case. And you wrote that police were called to a store by the store owner alleging that George Floyd had used to counterfeit $20 bills. A couple of the officers, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit because you actually gave us a longer recitation. A couple of the officers were newer on the job. You wrote that Mr. Chauvin had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for over a minute, and there were mixed reports on whether there were drugs in Mr. Floyd's system or not. You heard a little bit about the background of Mr. Chauvin and that Mr. Chauvin and Mr. Floyd may have worked together at one point, right?
Correct.
You'd heard a little bit of information about Mr. Floyd's family as well as a couple of the other officers that were present, right?
Correct.
All right. Now again, what you may hear in trial may be different than what you recall hearing beforehand, right?
Yes.
And it may be inclusive of some of that information, and some of that information may have been wrong or just may not be admitted in this trial. Do you understand that?
Yes.
So with all, you had a pretty thorough recollection of some things that had happened and what you had seen. Again, can you kind of set all of that aside? Can you, basically become a blank slate, right? And judge this case exclusively on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
You were asked your opinions, or your impressions of Mr. Floyd, as well as, I know this was pertaining to all 4 officers, but you were asked your general impression of both the officer as well as Mr. Floyd. And you checked, as it pertains to Mr. Chauvin, you checked somewhat negative or neutral. And you have negative thoughts from the constant news portrayal, but I don't think the news covers everything, nor would they have time to. Can you just kind of, why did you have a somewhat negative impression of the officer to a neutral, and why would it be important to get more information?
The somewhat negative is just the constant showing of it, I think, for a while there when it first occurred, and just the reaction from the community as well. Just the constantness of that, I think, made me believe it was the somewhat negative, and the reasoning for my answer on that. But the neutral side of it was, I'm always thinking about the person and, again, where they came from, what they've been through, experienced. And my neutral side of that was that his training to do that based on what occurred, and I didn't see the whole thing to be able to know whether that is what occurred.
Okay, so ultimately the question of police training or police practice may be a part of this trial. You're not a police officer, right?
Correct.
And I know you said you've had some training as a social worker to kind of deal with potential threats. Would you be able to kind of set aside what you may have learned and pay attention to the police practices as presented in court?
Yes.
Now, with respect to Mr. Floyd, you checked somewhat negative, neutral, and somewhat positive, and you wrote, reporting showed both good and bad. His family that he was a nice person, but also showed a history of drugs, unknown which one. I did not done my own further research. Okay. Let me ask you, in terms of your impression of Mr. Floyd, can you explain kind of, there's there's a wide spectrum. You kind of hit the whole spectrum there. Can you explain that a little?
I think that's part of where I come from, is always looking at every side of things. I'm always looking at why someone may have done something a certain way. His experience before with law enforcement, I thought about his family, because I saw the family so much on the news. So again, I had all kinds of thoughts on him with his past. They've talked about his past with drugs and things like that. I had every emotion, I think,
Right.
about him.
So perhaps this is a very overbroad generalization, but social workers tend to be empathetic people. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So I guess the question being is that, what if you don't hear anything about Mr. Floyd's past? I mean, what if you don't, in this trial, knowing what you had heard before, again, can you set that aside and listen to the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
In your professional life, do you work with people who abuse or have abused controlled substances?
Yes. Sometimes, not regularly. It just depends.
Okay. Do you think that if someone uses or abuses controlled substances, that makes them a bad person?
No.
Why do you think people may have that struggle?
I think it's a lot of things. It just depends on the person. I never judge a person based on that alone.
You were asked some questions about whether you had ever spoken with friends, family members, coworkers, or had any discussions online about this. You checked the box yes, and you wrote with family. So is it fair to assume you did not post any opinions on social media about this case?
I don't think, no, I've never, no.
Okay. But with your family, you wondered what caused or prompted the knee on the neck based on the training received by Derek Chauvin and all officers. And then on Twitter, you wrote that you were scared for the state of Minnesota as we were told violence was moving to the suburbs on the news.
Yes.
So you were obviously aware of the unrest that occurred after Mr. Floyd's death?
Yes.
And that caused you some fear?
Yes.
Okay. And you had heard some stories that it was expanding beyond the Twin Cities proper?
Yes.
Okay. Again, in terms of the training, you would understand that, again, that is a bit of a contest or perhaps conflict in this case. Do you understand?
Yes.
And would you be able to set, any of those discussions that you've had with family members or friends about what they think police training says about this incident aside, listen to the evidence from both sides and make your decision based on that?
Yes.
You were asked the question whether you believe that the community was negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place since Mr. Floyd's death, and you wrote both. Negative in the sense that people took advantage of rioting and looting, even from out of state, that affected others' livelihood, but positive in that the community has seemingly come together to make it better. So do you differentiate between protesting and rioting or looting?
Yes.
How do you define the two?
Protesting, making your voice heard about something that you don't agree with, hoping for positive change, and rioting, looting is taking advantage in the sense of using those discussions of wanting positive change into something negative.
Okay. You were asked ultimately if you feel that you could be fair and impartial, regardless of your opinions, and you wrote, I believe I could. So ultimately, unfortunately, I have to press you a little bit. We can't have equivocation. Can you? Or would you try? Or what's your sort of response?
I think that hearing both sides would definitely help and I think I could, as if both sides were being heard instead of like my constant exposure to news side, negative side all of the time. I would like to hear both sides. So yes, I think if I was exposed to both, yes.
Right. So, again, you know, Mr. Chauvin doesn't have to call a witness, doesn't have to ask a question, doesn't have to prove anything. Can you abide by that? I mean, if you want, if hearing both sides is so tantamount to you, if you only continue to hear one side, would that make it more difficult?
I think what I mean by what I mean by that is that Mr. Chauvin's side is his presumption of innocence. That's what I mean by that. So yes.
You asked, or you were asked a question whether you or someone close to you has ever supported or advocated in favor of or against police reform, and you wrote, family members have discussed support of both. What do you mean by that, and how does that, what was the general tenor of the conversations on both sides?
It was typically focused on training in response to situations of like mental health or things like that, having more specific mental health and not so focused on what seems like a presumption of guilt right away, that sort of thing.
There was a page where you were asked to rank your opinions from strongly agree to strongly disagree with numerous sort of broad statements. Do you recall that exercise generally?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. And so I guess I just want to, and I know it's been a couple months since you've answered this, but I just wanted to follow up with you on a couple of questions. One of the questions was, blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you check the box that you somewhat agree with that proposition. What do you base your opinion on? Was it your training? Is it, media? Explain.
It's mostly my training, things I've been taught in college and school of minorities not having the same opportunities as in many areas, employment, education, things like that. It's mostly my training.
Okay. Do you have any personal experience, or have you had clients or friends who've sort of discussed their experiences especially in terms of the criminal justice system?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay. You were asked, or the statement reads, I support defunding the Minneapolis Police Department, and you strongly disagreed with that. Why did you strongly disagree with that?
I do not think that what I was understanding from that overall movement was basically getting rid of police in general, and I did not agree with that statement.
Okay. Has your understanding of that movement changed since you filled this questionnaire out?
A little bit, I guess. Not a whole lot, though.
Okay. So you would still strongly disagree with defunding the Minneapolis Police Department?
Yes.
You were asked a question, police in my community make me feel safe, and you somewhat agreed with that. Do you have a personal experience that has caused you to have some level of mistrust for police?
No, I think what I was referring to was I really haven't had personal experience with it, so I do feel safe with the police in my community.
Okay. You were asked a couple of questions about Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and you had a neutral impression about both of those statements.
Yes.
With respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote, I'm unsure. I believe Black Lives Matter as much as Latinas, police, etc. As a social worker, I was trained to support everyone no matter what, always. And with respect to Blue Lives Matter, you wrote, same as above, everyone at all ends of every spectrum matter and deserve basic respect no matter what.
Yes.
Is there anything you would want to add to that? I mean, I know that your role as a social worker is one aspect of your life, right? Anything that you would add to your impression of either of those movements, organizations, whatever you want to call them?
I always look at the positive side of all of the movements. I think they're all great. I think it's a good thing to be supportive of everyone. I don't think one is more important than another. I think it's all equally, we should all be treated with respect and given opportunities.
Okay. So in that regard, let me ask you, if you hear testimony of a police officer, would you give that testimony greater weight or assign more credibility to it simply by virtue of the fact that the person is a police officer?
No.
Are you able to kind of look at all testimony, judge it within the context of the other testimony and the evidence?
Yes.
You indicated that you have two relatives who are nurses.
Yes.
Would you, if there were medical testimony in this case, would you call your relatives and kind of say, hey, this is what they're saying in trial, and can you tell me more about that?
No.
Okay. Now, your training as a social worker, you are trained to deal with people who are having mental health crises, correct?
Yes.
And you understand that the police may have different training than what you have. Would you be able to judge police in this case based on their training and set aside what you may have done differently in a particular situation?
Yes.
Now, lastly, you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? You checked both yes and not sure. And you wrote, mostly concerned about public information being released, including address. And then there's a reference to your career. So you said, not sure if this would be so different.
Yes.
Do you think that your concerns about your personal safety have been alleviated? Or do you continue to be concerned about your safety as a juror?
I think they've been alleviated.
Okay. And you understand that there would ultimately be two potential verdicts in this case, right? I mean, it's either guilty or not guilty.
Yes.
Would you allow your concerns over your public or your personal safety to influence your decision in any way?
No.
Okay. If I may have a moment, Your Honor.
Right.
We'll pass for cause.
All right, Mr. Slisher.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have a medium understanding of what social workers do, work with a few that have the title, but I need to know a little bit more specifically about what you do and what your experience has been, without naming your employer.
Yeah.
But can you just tell us a little bit more about your job on the day-to-day?
Sure. I get services in home for clients of all ages, all mental health diagnoses, all sorts of things, mental health, chemical health, kids, adults. I just make sure they have services in home to keep them safe and to be able to stay living in the community.
Are some of your clients then under some sort of a court order or involved in the commitment process?
Some of them, but it's very broad. I don't have very many at this time.
Do you have experience in the commitment process, stays of a commitment, or things of that nature?
We are not typically involved. We usually get involved after they are already on the commitment. I don't have any knowledge of the process or anything that happens before then.
Okay. And what type of services do you coordinate?
I coordinate independent living, people so that they can teach them how to be independent, go grocery shopping. I coordinate people that need assistance with getting dressed in the morning, making their meals, a lot of different services, mental health, getting like therapists in home, things like that.
Medication monitoring?
Yes.
You coordinate that as well. Can you tell us a little bit what drew you into that line of work? Why did you want to become a social worker? I see that was your degree.
Yes. I started out and I just said I want to help people. I had a counselor in college, and that is kind of where she led me. That's basically what I said, and she thought it would be a good fit, and it has been so far.
Okay. Good counselor that
Yes.
took an interest in you and it helped you find your path.
Yes.
And in your caseload, how large is it?
About 65 people.
You indicated that you have had some discussions with family members and friends about police reform, and some folks have, in your circle, have expressed views one way and the other. Is that right?
Yes.
So what's it like being in a conversation? Have these conversations happened at the same time, where you have different people expressing different views?
At times, yes.
What's it like being in a conversation like that?
It's very interesting, and a lot of people notice I'm very quiet. I'm a big observer in those conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of police reform, what are your thoughts on police reform?
I think there are good things and there are things that should be changed, but I think the conversation is a good start of having those discussions of what's good and what should be changed for the better.
So tell me about the good things.
I think the presence of police is a good thing to have. It makes the community safe. I think their job is important, keeping the community safe in general. And I just think that I think for the overwhelming majority, it is a good thing to have.
Do you interact with law enforcement in your job? Sometimes, when people have mental health issues they're struggling with or whatnot, things can take a different turn. Do you ever have to contact law enforcement?
I used to, but not so much anymore. With being in home, I don't see those situations as often anymore. No.
In what context did you used to have to contact law enforcement?
Yes, when I was first starting out as a social worker, I worked at a facility that had court mandated. It was people court mandated to go through anger management classes, and I worked with law enforcement and those people that were court mandated to be there a lot more often.
And describe some of your interactions with law enforcement when you've had to get law enforcement involved with clients on occasion.
Yes. If they were being unruly in the actual class, if they were saying things that were alarming, I had to be aware of those things and notify the right people.
And when you did have to notify law enforcement in those situations, can you describe how those interactions would take place?
It was mostly just explaining the situation, explaining what I was doing, and how it started, how a situation occurred. But after that, they kind of handled it from there.
And how did they handle it?
Usually removal from the class, and that was typically the most that I saw.
Did you ever see a law enforcement officer apply force or have to use force in a circumstance like that?
No.
How were they able to remove the person from the room without using force?
It was typically it wasn't a big scene. Usually they would just say, "Come with me," and usually I never saw anyone disagree.
And I take it these were favorable interactions you had with law enforcement. You had something you needed help with, and they helped you.
Yes.
And so those would be the good things with law enforcement. Why don't you share with me a little bit about some ideas you have for things that should be changed?
I guess that's hard for me to answer because I haven't seen anything personally. I haven't been through any experience personally with something that should be changed. But I guess that's hard for me to answer at this moment.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone, a client or a close friend, who talked about instances they've had with law enforcement that they believe should have been handled differently?
Yes, I'm sure I have, yes.
Do you recall any of those and what they may have discussed with you?
Yes. I'm trying to come up with something particular, but yes, I can recall.
What do you remember about that?
I remember them speeding, and they questioned it, and they openly admitted it to the police officer, and they still didn't think they should have been because it was their first time. So
I see.
yeah, nothing major. But.
All right. Have you, in any discussions with anyone in your immediate family, heard strong views expressed about this particular case?
Yes.
And I guess, can you share with us what views have been expressed about this case?
I specifically to this one just have been involved in those conversations of he should not have had his knee on the neck for that long. Nothing in regards to it not happening at all, mostly for how long it was, but that was just the majority of that conversation.
And this was a close family member?
Yes.
And what effect do you think, if any, that knowing that opinion, coming into this would have on you if you sat as a juror in this case?
I don't think it would affect me. It hasn't changed my view so far.
So at some point this case will be over and you would have to go back and have a conversation with your family member.
Yes.
How do you think it might affect you having to discuss whatever the result is in this case with the family member who's expressed some strong views?
I don't think it would have an effect on our relationship. My family has grown to know that where I come from, and if I'm quiet, it's usually there's a reason for that, and I don't try and enable things in a certain type of way. My family's grown to know me from being in this for 5 years.
Are you one of those who then, if you grow quiet, I take it that might be because you're disagreeing with what's being said and you're just not voicing your opinion in that?
Not necessarily. I think it's more just I don't like to, if I can tell the other side is already elevated or something, I don't necessarily enjoy keeping it that way. So.
Do you think that you would need or find a need to have to explain or justify your decision to anyone in your close circle who may have expressed opinions about this particular case?
No, I have never felt that need in any other situation.
You indicated that you would be interested in hearing a little bit about the police officers' training.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you might be interested to hear?
I think just how long that training was being given. I know I'm given trainings yearly, so is that something that is occurring every year, and just how they took that training from what they exercised. But.
So when you're going through your yearly training, they're going over the same concepts, I'm assuming, pretty much every year?
Yes.
Are you paying attention, or you've kind of heard this before?
What do you mean?
In terms of the training, I mean, how much of this is sinking in year after year as you're hearing it?
With my personal things,
Yes.
it's pretty sunken in there because I am learning the same things. A lot of things have not changed in my line of work.
When discussing the protests and the effects that the protest had on the community, you discussed that it was negative in the sense that some people took advantage of rioting and looting, and then you said even from out of state. Can you tell me what you meant by even from out of state?
I was referring to what I had heard on the news of there was a while they had said almost everyone that they had caught, so to speak, was from out of state.
And where did you hear that?
Just the news. I just watch the news mostly. I don't usually seek out like internet or anything like that.
Did the news say anything about, what state or where these people were from, or what possible motive they would have to come from out of state and participate in rioting and looting?
Not that I remember. I remember a couple from Chicago, Illinois, but nothing else.
And you also indicated that based on news reports, you were concerned, or that raised some concern that people might be coming into the suburbs, that the rioting might spill over. Can you tell me what you were basing that concern on?
Again, hearing it from the news that they were going to other cities coming out of Minneapolis because of the heavy police presence in Minneapolis, they were spreading out.
Okay, one moment, Your Honor. Just a few follow-up, Your Honor. You'd indicated that in your experience, when you've had to call law enforcement in and they've removed somebody who was unruly, in all instances the person complied with the police.
Yes.
Can you tell me what your thoughts would be on someone who does not comply with the police when they, come in and on your request are trying to remove a person who's being unruly?
I think it depends on the situation. Since I've not experienced it, I'm not quite sure how I would react to that, but I would hope that I would be able to work with law enforcement like they would be able to work with me to be able to get that person to just be in a better state and feel better about anything, but I've not had that experience, so I'm not sure.
And some people may hold the view that if you're not complying with the police when they ask you or tell you to do something and you get injured, you kind of get what's coming to you. Tell me what your thoughts are.
I think I used to think that, but I don't necessarily believe that anymore. Again, because we should all have that respect. You should respect the officer telling you something as much as the flip side. So I think that's my view on that.
Can you tell me why you may have re-examined that view?
I'm not quite sure what that. I think maybe just hearing both sides again. I don't really know if there's something specific I can point out to why that changed.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. The state passes for cause.
Juror 118, you will serve on our jury. And so we're going to have you come back on Monday at 9 a.m. to start the trial. But watch for any communications from the jury office as far as logistics, and if there's been any change in timing on this. So, any questions for me? Otherwise, the deputy will take you out. You had a letter to get in here. Make sure you keep that.
Okay.
Keep it safe and bring it with next time.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we're going to break.
Right now.
Yeah. All right. It's 5 minutes to 12. We have a 1 o'clock Chambers conference scheduled, and we'll resume with jury selection at 1:30. So let's break for lunch so I give you a full hour, and we'll be back at Chambers at 1 o'clock, but in the courtroom for jury selection at 1:30. All right. Thank you.